Dr. Jeff Skolnick, thank you very much for coming on to Transformations today and spending your late afternoon with us. Thank you.
Mark, it's a pleasure, really.
Thank you. Your work is very interesting to me. And you've created this new kind of, but a new approach to psychotherapy and advanced spiritual wellness, I would say, or spirituality that you call the SatoriWest Method. And I'd like to talk a little bit about the details of it. But first, can you give us a breakdown of, I think there's 5 stages to the method?
Yeah, of course. So I call them points, but they really are phases in many ways too. So the 5 points of the SatoriWest Method are they follow the Buddhist Four Noble Truths, but they give a lot more detail than you would get in just a regular description of the Buddhist Four Noble Truths, because it involves the brain and because it involves wellness on a larger scale. So, and then I added a truth. So there are 5 points to the SatoriWest Method. So the first point is that for human beings, for our species, as long as we have existed and have some degree of, self-awareness, we struggle psychologically, and it doesn't matter how your circumstances, whether you're poor or rich, young or old, living in a first world or third world country, living thousands of years ago or present, people psychologically struggle, and we get masterful at hiding it. But if you think of all the things that cause humans to psychologically struggle with their emotions, it's just that life is a series of challenges and even crises. From childhood, there's no perfect parents, and siblings are not always great, and control issues. And then you head into adolescence, where you are super full of anxiety, want to fit in, and then teenage years, which are full of angst and anger, and then you're just desperate to go into adult years, and then whoosh, you get this sort of unexpected sort of fire hose of stress. And then throughout life, you suffer loss of people, places, things, pets. You suffer illnesses, and then you get old, which is kind of the universal aspect of suffering, and then you deal with dying. And so that's the first point. It's called the human condition. Everybody struggles psychologically. And as you go through each point, you kind of need to sort of saturate yourself a little bit in it, because our normal default is to think that we're the only one suffering, or that our suffering is somehow unique, or that it's a point of shame, or that we have to hide it, that kind of thing. So the second point of the method is that all the reasons I just gave you are surface reasons. They're not the deeper reasons why people struggle psychologically and suffer and stress. It's because of the wiring, the survival wiring in our brain. So I can, do you want me just to go through that a little bit and just?
Yeah, just on the first point alone, I do think about Buddha's first noble truth, life is suffering. And then a quote from an article you wrote for Psychology Today, which I'd like to read so I get it right. We are practiced like masters at distracting ourselves from our human condition. Just good writing. Pushing it out of awareness and generally faking our feelings in public so no one can see them. And I think about Carl Jung's notion of the need for a persona, an outward persona in society where we can be who we want to everyone else. It's like Facebook, you're putting all the best thing that you ate and the best thing that you did, but the rest of the day you're not putting up, I was constipated and I couldn't sleep last night, and such and such called and they're coming to repossess the car, but look at this cake I ate. It's all the persona that we're putting out there, which is and correct me if I'm wrong, it's all like it's just an ego play, um, all of that. And I think that's the surface that it's really not the true self, right? And that's the surface that you're saying that we're scratching.
That's exactly right. Um, and in many ways, there's a survival aspect to that because you know you want to fit in because if you
Right.
don't, there's an existential, you may be cast out and there's a, existential worry that you may not, wouldn't have people around you and what you need. Uh, and you, of course, you're masterful at hiding it until you can't. And
Right.
then that's is, what keeps me in business.
That's right.
So the deeper second point of the SatoriWest method is that all those reasons are not the actual reasons why we suffer. It's because of the survival wiring in our brains.
So that means
Uh,
we don't really have control over it on the surface, right? Unless we kind of dig deep or learn skills to control that. If we're hardwired for that, is that what you're saying?
I think that's right. I
Okay.
think that's right. Exactly right. And and I can circle back to this a little bit
Wonderful.
later, but maybe in a more cursory way. What that survival wiring is that when any animal uh, detects something that it wants or needs, or detects something that it wants to avoid or is afraid of, or would be harmful, it has attentional mechanisms that automatically focus on it. And
Mm,
the more motivation, the more drive there is towards that object, the more attention gets locked in tighter and tighter until it becomes, fairly exclusive attention.
mm,
Um, and so what that works for animals who can just like stimulus response, just like boop, see it, and then just react on it. For humans, it actually warps our reality in ways that are, they're fine when you're younger, when you're a kid, maybe, but as you hit, as you get even approach adulthood, it's not functional. It
mm,
becomes actually counterproductive. And so that reality that gets warped is, I call it very benign word, tunnel vision, but it has a lot to it, such as, being in less control, kind of stimulus, being kind of, engage in stimulus response, impulsivity or compulsiveness, not being aware of other things around you, feeling like you're painted in a corner, you don't have choices or options, believing things that you would not normally believe. Your ego, that sense of self, gets inflamed and has you feel even more and more separate from reality around you. That distorts your thinking, that distorts your sense of time and everything. So there's a lot to tunnel vision, and those 8 aspects of tunnel vision are really worth exploring in some ways. Maybe not during this interview necessarily, unless there's time, but it's powerful to understand that it's not the surface things that are causing your stress. It's
mm.
how your brain is reacting to it that drags you down a rabbit hole. The third point of the SatoriWest method is that the exact opposite is also possible in our human brains.
Mhm.
That's because we don't have one human brain, we have two, actually. There's two brains that each have their own awareness. They each have their own personality. They each have their own way of experiencing things. And those awarenesses on each brain are also aware of each other. It's just and that's what gives you the sense of, oh, I'm alive. I know I'm alive. I'm aware. It's awareness of awareness, or knowing that you know. It's kind of an objectless, empty kind of awareness of just being. But it's always there. I mean, you always know you're alive, but you just don't realize it that much, especially when you're in crisis. And so, um, when those when the tunnel vision the things that cause tunnel vision can be released, that self-awareness, which is not a great word, but it's people use it a lot because there's no self that you're aware of. There's just the awareness of awareness, the process. It allows to come to the forefront rather than being in the background,
Hmm.
and gives you this greater sense of presence, of you kind of wake up to what the moment really means, that kind of thing. And so and that's what sort of awakening kind of is. It's just this waking up to what it means to exist right now, because that intense, more acute awareness of being alive wakes you up in that way. And it also has you release your minds, wanting to carve up reality into ways that drag you into tunnel vision. The fourth, do you want to ask anything about that before I keep zipping on?
That zipping is good. And also I was thinking when you're saying phrases like the awareness that you're aware or conscious of your consciousness, are we talking about the you know who is aware of your awareness, like that higher level of, who is the I noticing you, who is the awareness noticing the I, who is hearing my thoughts? Is it that same type of thing that it gets at a quite higher level, or are we talking about it is okay?
It is very much. I mean, that's a Zen
Right.
koan, I think the word who can get you to focus on an idea.
Yeah.
I think what maybe more maybe more functional as like what is aware,
Right.
what is that kind of thing. Yep, that's a great point, and it's absolutely true. That's what it is.
So
And that
Mhm.
koans get you to turn your attention inward so that that is experienced more acutely.
Right. Yeah, I think people who haven't meditated or
Mm.
or thought about things in this way uh, need some instruction to understand it. They're living their life unconsciously, basically, based on, I think, programming from our parents, our teachers, television, whatever. Yeah,
Well, the survival wiring
right.
also gets built on by programming, by conditioning. So the
Conditioning, right,
brain is both hardware and it's also has software that condition you from birth to
right.
have a sense of ego, a separation, to think the next moment's going to be different or better than this moment. Really
Yeah.
great points. And I use the word koans. I apologize that it's a Zen uh, strategy of using it, or stories or concepts that have no cognitive answer, so that one is reaches a point where it just that ego tends to just give out after a while, and then it just like whoosh, then everything kind of reveals itself on its own. So that can either there's an abrupt way of doing that, and there's also a more gradual way of just every day cultivating less tunnel vision and more awakening.
Yeah. I think, your use of tunnel vision is good because I think, well, it's a highly used term, and it really focused, no pun intended, focuses in on what people's life is. This is my job, this is my home life, whatever. These are my four best friends. These are the 8 things I eat every week. And their whole life is just focus, 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 drive, drive, and being on autopilot, so to speak, and never really experiencing awareness or aliveness.
And
Yeah.
also with the illusion that we actually are in conscious control. We are in control. That who am I, that what am I is absolutely in a more of a macro managerial executive control, not
Hmm.
in a micro managerial way. So and that causes a lot of suffering in itself. The feeling like, I'm in control, so why isn't my brain cooperating?
I think the ego plays that game on us. It makes us think we're in control when we're really not at times. Is that part of a ingrained defense mechanism that we have, or inbred?
Yeah, I think a sense of ego evolved somehow in our species
Mm.
to kind of coordinate that survival wiring. And so it's in sort of like collusion with that survival programming and wiring, both wiring and programming. And so it gives the reality that of separation, it gives the reality of control, gives, it's kind of a lower reality that is never able to be satisfied. Never.
Yeah, it's crazy. And now when you talked about the two hemispheres of the brain, you talked about them as two separate brains that are basically connected. And I think you said it gives us the illusion, again with the illusions, that it's one cohesive mind. But what happens when the brains are separated through surgery or traumatic accident? Do people are seeing two images at once or two voices at once? Or like, or is that
I
schizophrenia?
No.
I know.
I There are ways to, so my theory that has to be tested is that people who've had the main track of fibers, the corpus callosum, and there's also other tracks below that, they have less self-awareness. So they, um, they don't fully grasp the aliveness that they have that they're in possession of. But that does need to be tested, and I would love to do research on that someday. Who knows?
Yeah. Do you think people just, and this is just a sideways thought, and I apologize to the listeners who are waiting to hear point four, is that do you think that people who are depressed, or is it in your experience as a clinician, as a psychiatrist, that people who are depressed because they're uh, not living to their fullest, they're not living brightly, to use kind of an odd word, but you understand its meaning,
Yes.
to not have that joy of life, that there's some problem perhaps in the corpus callosum or somewhere in the adjoinings of the brains?
No, none of us are. I mean, I think depression is kind of what I'm saying, is that we
Yeah.
all have some degree of depression going on,
Yeah.
period, until you can allow that tunnel vision to just sort of fall open into a greater reality. I think people who are diagnosed with depression or anxiety disorders or any psychiatric condition, I think one of the things that they kind of go hand in hand is that, neuropsychiatric conditions force your brain into deeper tunnel vision.
Mm,
And
right.
life and deep living in deep tunnel vision causes depression. So
Ah,
they kind of goes back and forth.
yeah, I see. It's chicken and egg at some point.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you for that. Now, were we on number four or on three?
Uh, three was perspective, what that
It's
is.
perspective.
So
Okay.
four is basically how you go from tunnel vision to perspective.
Okay.
And clearly going from a survival mode to a perspective, higher reality of life, enlightened, awakened mode, um, requires the brain to shift. It's a very subtle shift because it's not going from one separate reality to another. It's opening up to the fact that there is a higher reality and a lower reality, an absolute and a relative reality happening at the very same time. We just don't notice it. Like, you go through life just very simply, and do you notice that what it means that you're alive? No,
No, we don't
never.
think about it. Yeah.
I mean, there are special occasions that will do that, weddings and things and births and things like that. And those are transient and people try to grab onto it. And then that puts you back in another form of tunnel vision. So
Hmm.
to, to, to shift one's brain, to allow one's brain to shift from any degree of tunnel vision to any degree of perspective leading to awakening or enlightenment. Um, there are three basic avenues. One is just, if you know you're in tunnel vision, then you can't be in that much tunnel vision.
Mm-hmm.
That's a
Recognition of the problem. Right.
that's a degree of perspective right there. so that you can step outside of it and witness it without changing it whatsoever. You don't change the causes and the conditions of the tunnel vision. You're just opening up awareness so it sees it in a wider way. And so that, but you could start off just, saying, oh, that's ego inflation, that's this, that's that, or, that's loss of self-control, that's distortion of thinking, that all go along with tunnel vision. Any recognition of any part of it or all of it is, I think, is the foundation. And I think it's why Buddhism and Buddha, or Siddhartha himself,
Yeah.
said that, there's no real, that enlightenment is the antidote to suffering, and that there's no understanding spiritual enlightenment without understanding suffering. They go hand in hand, like a hand in a glove. So the second way, we're on the fourth point still.
Right.
So
Well, can I just make
yeah, please.
jump in here? It sounds like you're saying once you expose Oz, you can't be fooled by the tricks of Oz, right? Like it's just a little short guy behind some levers, it's like, and if you can see that that's what's kind of turning on your tunnel vision and putting the goggles on you, that the goggles, they may slip back down once in a while, but they're just goggles and you can kind of swipe them aside. And that's probably the easiest of the methods. Like you're lucky if you're there and you can self know that you've got some blinders on.
Yeah. I mean, that's a great analogy. I think that, and I would add to that, that you can know on some level that you're in tunnel vision, and that will relieve it to some extent immediately. Just like boosh, like, oh my God, that's me in tunnel vision.
Yeah.
I think that but you can, because of survival, because of all the conditioning we've had since we were born, we very quickly slip back into tunnel vision.
Yeah.
Right after that, I think that there is a point in awakening where the curtain is drawn back and the wizard is exposed in a way that is kind of unforgettable.
Mm.
That illusion just gets kind of pierced. And maybe you would even, I mean, all of us, even enlightened Zen masters or enlightened anyone,
Right.
always subject to going back into tunnel vision if they're not careful.
Well,
You
that's
know,
our base nature, right? Since
well, it's a default, but
our
I
default,
don't,
yes.
but I think that there could be a new default.
Well, that's what you're aiming for, right? In your
Right.
method and in your work. So, yeah.
Yeah. The second way is uh, kind of obvious, is that you have to, there are skills you can learn that help your brain shift.
Hmm.
Uh, and so I have created this like 6-layered brain shifting skill where you kind of open awareness to the moment, you get into a place of detachment, you find a place of inner emptiness where there is self-awareness, blah, 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 blah. And then you can practice one aspect of a time at a time. But in essence, it's important to note that you're really just faking it with those skills.
Hmm.
But faking it can be powerfully helpful.
Right.
Also, information can be powerfully useful, because very few people throughout the thousands of years of human existence have really kind of reached in and got this sense of awakening that's just waiting there for them. But there are some very simple aspects of brain shifting skills that I think are so powerful that they would serve you well.
Yeah.
I know that this point may sound a little bit like TMI.
Hmm.
I caution people when I put the word journey in quotes, or when I say that you're sort of faking it until you can have the actual realization. Because you can get caught up into a life of yearning and effort and then miss the point. Like you say, well, Dr. Skolnick said that there's skills you can learn. Yeah, there's skills that need to be completely let go of
Right.
at certain point. So the third, so practicing those skills every single day. And you can, I teach my patients, there's 6 layers and many skills within brain shifting, and it gets, get unnecessarily complicated. But if you just learn one of those, they will lead to the other ones.
Mm,
And so if you do it in a dedicated way every day, then you're just not going to be in that much tunnel vision. It's just like really hard to force your brain into that much tunnel vision when your brain is, those cells have been activated, because there's a thickening of your cortex
mhm.
when you practice these skills. And the thickening itself becomes semi irreversible. So the third way that your brain can shift in from tunnel vision to perspective is that the brain is an organ, and it's a physical organ. And if you soak it in physical wellness, you're gonna have perspective. So if you're feeling good and energized and relaxed, um, you will just not take things as personally. I mean, you can see things with larger. So there are 6 other types of wellness besides the physical.
Mm,
There's mental. So if you know your issues psychologically, you go to psychotherapy, whatever, then you can have just perspective from that. I call these kind of indirect or maybe backdoor ways to get perspective. Then there's social, having love and ability to stand up for yourself, whatever. And then there's cultural wellness, which mostly is like having your life organized.
right.
So, like Zen temples are, you can eat off the floor usually.
Yeah.
And so having, your time managed and, and fitting in, understanding the balance between the popular culture and yourself, all those things. And then the next is moral wellness. So it starts off with having a sense of balance in the various areas and having precepts that you try to stick to that keep you from going off the rails into tunnel vision. Like, because if you're super mean to people, then you're going to just be lost in tunnel vision.
Right.
But the core, I think, of moral wellness is having an altruistic mission
Hmm.
that definitely gives you perspective. Um, and there's a lot to these areas of wellness that accounts
Right.
for a lot of the hours of curriculum in the hospital. And then the last area is existential wellness. Anything that puts your brain into a place where it appreciates its existence.
Mm,
So science can do that, physics, religion, appreciating, various aspects of religion, God, nature, just having gratitude, practicing gratitude, seeing beauty in things, et cetera, et cetera. So all those things allow the brain to let go of tunnel vision, go into perspective. So with that outside in wellness and the inside out skills of recognizing tunnel vision and also daily practice, I think is a more powerful, more effective way to transform your life.
mhm.
That's the fourth point of the method.
So you said something there, and you want to know, you want to know that you're alive and feel that you're alive, and we don't really think about it, um, too much, right? And then I think about people who become addicted to gambling or drugs or, extreme sports activities, skydiving. They're trying to capture that feeling of aliveness again and again and again in some way, or excitement that makes them feel alive, but it's almost in a way that could endanger their life, right? I mean, their financial well-being, their physical well-being, their, life itself. Maybe those aren't the best ways to find out that you're alive.
That's a great observation. So we actually use the method on units which were only for chemical or substance use disorders,
Hmm.
where we'd say like, what grabs your attention? Alcohol or drugs, and then boop, 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 and then you lose self-control and your ego gets inflated and you start going to denial. But I think your point is really well taken that the initial impulse of any real form of tunnel vision in humans is to feel pleasure, to feel, you know, to feel a sense of joy. It's just that the pleasure that we're getting is not deep and it's fleeting.
Right.
So like happiness doesn't come from external sources, and
Right.
relief doesn't come from avoiding things that are painful or difficult. Um, it comes internally from this sense that's always this gift, really, of being a human that you were born with, that this sense of the magnitude of what it means that you're alive and can know you're alive, and
Hmm.
that hold the entirety of the moment in awareness.
Right.
Just holding the entirety of the moment in awareness, which is a huge part of perspective, is that you can hold two different paradigms in awareness at the same time.
Hmm.
You can see someone as both good and bad, good mother, bad mother, or good, you know, good choice, bad choice, but you hold it, and so that you're not lost in discrimination. Your brain can unconsciously integrate those things better.
Hmm.
So that's back to the third point, a point that
Right.
I. So the fifth point of the method, if you're ready to jump
Yes,
into it,
please.
it's just really a culmination of the other ones, is that crisis and hardship are opportunities for great perspective. And that's both a neurophysiological thing, is that
Mhm.
these tunnel vision becomes habitual just
Mm.
by the nature of it. We get lost in these deep grooves of tunnel vision where we've spent our lives just being conditioned to try to avoid things, paying attention to things we're trying to avoid and get things we want to get. And so what happens is when the brain gets shaken up in any way that takes you out of the routines that you've used to, bury your life in, the brain literally just gets shaken out of those habits. And it just kind of jolts you in many ways into perspective. I mean, there are veterans, and I know friends, different, things where veterans who had their legs amputated in a war, some who say it was the best thing that ever happened to them,
Yeah.
suffered different traumas, who wake up to a new reality. On and on. I could talk about that for a long time. The other aspect of crisis and hardship, besides being physically shaken out of out of it, whether you want to or not, is that the weird phenomenon is that the more tunnel vision you're in, and so there's cultural tunnel vision that we're all in, where it's like
Yeah.
you have to get ahead, you have to be this to the world, and then there is sort of dysfunctional, more tunnel vision, where you're just lost in your own personality, habits, and it's kind of, you can become toxic to yourself. And then there's crisis tunnel vision, where and that's where I, see, most of my patients are in crisis, where you know, they're in that such deep tunnel vision that they would suicide, or they'd hurt other people or commit homicide. And you ask them later when they had a modicum of perspective, and they're like, I'm like, you had children. What were you thinking about wanting to kill yourself? And they're like, I don't know. That was just a different reality. And when you say, well,
Right.
you were in tunnel vision, you're like, oh my God, that explains it. There's no blame. It's a phenomenon that happens to you. Tunnel vision that's more severe is actually easier to detect because it's so abnormal. You
Right.
can't live very long. And so those crises, so those patients who hear that was tunnel vision, who get it right now, that you're in tunnel vision, that leads to an enormous amount of perspective. I'm kind of jealous, really. The patient in the hospital really brought to tears, or they have these transformations right in front of my eyes, because of the knowledge of just the 5 points of SatoriWest Method, and also the understanding of what tunnel vision is.
Oh.
That's the fifth point.
There wasn't so much information overload in Buddhist time. There wasn't phones and computers and shopping malls and texts and stuff that he's being hit by so many things. I mean, what he did was noble, leaving his rich, privileged family and sitting under a tree and becoming enlightenment. And I mean, it's insane what he's done for humanity. But I wonder just about all the amount of data and distraction that's hitting us on a daily basis. We can feel like it's not tunnel vision because there's 50 apps to look at and the news and all the friends, but really it's all one thing. It's your social life, right? Or it's your, work and family life and friend life all focused in on more pieces of input, but same focus, right?
I'll speak to that in just one second, but another point that you brought up, I think is worthy of understanding, because this is my whole thing, is that in the time of Buddha, I'm not even sure that they really understood that the brain really did anything.
Right.
You know,
Right.
with this modern understanding of the brain, it takes Buddhism to a different dimension. It makes it crystal clear how you can, how you can shift it. The point that you were making is such a great point, Mark, because it's in many ways, it's more challenging on tunnel vision because your attention is, I mean, Madison Avenue psychologists are paid millions and millions of dollars just to grab your attention on television.
Right.
And they have these, they show big dinosaurs and they're just trying to sell, things that are not even related to it, because they know that if they can grab your attention, they can put you in tunnel vision, which causes you to believe things more than you ever would. And it inflates your ego, and you have to have that, and you have to have that. So, yeah, it's more challenging to live now because people are intentionally trying to get your tunnel vision. And, and also charismatic leaders grab your attention, and then you get into tunnel vision. And one of the aspects of tunnel vision that I kind of allude to back and forth is that you tend to be more suggestible. You tend to believe things without criticism, and your ego gets inflated, and you take things personally that are not personal, et cetera, et cetera.
So you're talking about cognitive dissonance on a mass scale is what's happening, really. You have all these negative facts towards a charismatic leader, and yet you still want the charismatic leader. Doesn't matter how many things have gone wrong; those facts no longer matter or pertinent.
Yeah, I think cognitive dissonance is a kind of it's a form of perspective.
Mm-hmm.
The problem is they don't have cognitive dissonance. They
Mm.
don't know their vision.
Mm.
And so it becomes a self-fulfilling rabbit hole where the tunnel vision gets tighter and tighter and tighter until you're in Jonestown, and you're killing your children and you. Um, so
Right.
it's a dangerous condition to be in. And all humans are in it.
It's like
You and I are in it
mental
now.
suffocation. Yeah. What role does neuroplasticity play in this? I mean, I can see that there's got to be, and I don't understand the brain that well, but conceptually, I would think that somebody who's been under a lot of stress or done a lot of drugs or has had a brain injury or some sort, we know that through different practices, medical interventions or mind-body techniques, that you can kind of rewire the brain away from, that those old thought processes or beliefs or something. And I'm assuming that is that an essential part of kind of the method, the SatoriWest method, is techniques that help do that.
Yeah, these questions are really perceptive, but they bring up a lot of things.
Right.
So one aspect of just, you talk about in like neurochemistry. So I will sometimes have patients who I explain, if I can, when I worked in the hospital, in particular, when I had the time, I would explain the SatoriWest method, and at least about the 8 facets of tunnel vision. And and they'll, like, if they have any degree of like awareness, they go, yeah, that's right. And it's like, I'll say, I'm about to give you a medication that will also give you more perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Or I just give the medication first and say, hey, that gave me perspective. And so that you can learn from the medications. So it's definitely, perspective is a matter of, that realization of a deeper, more absolute reality that's present at the same time as there's a relative reality. The ego doesn't die, it doesn't go away. It's just surrounded by realization of a higher reality. That is a form of neuroplasticity, right? I'm not sure that, I mean, many animals have neuroplasticity. Humans have it, I think, as much as many other animals, certainly other primates. It's just that we can direct our awareness so that neuroplasticity is allowed to happen. So remember, I told you that when you practice these brain shifting skills, you're activating certain clusters of cells that don't normally get activated because you're so busy trying to find joy and happiness and live to the next moment and satisfy your ego and avoid shame, blah, 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 that you just don't use those cells that tell you that you're alive. And so when those cells get thickened, that is neuroplasticity. And there's tons of data on how mindfulness itself causes neuroplasticity, causes thickening of the gray matter in certain areas.
You made a comment that back in Buddha's day, you're not really sure if they really understood the brain. And probably they didn't understand the brain. And I'm thinking, my thought at the time was that when you said it, was that, yeah, they were thinking about the mind, not the brain. And so thinking about your thoughts and therefore our perceptions and our ability to comprehend and break things down and understand. And Buddha's like, hey, man, world is suffering and the suffering is an illusion. And, so I think, they didn't have any kind of tools to really understand the brain itself, I don't think. But the mind and the brain are different for sure. It's almost like and I'm speaking as somebody not in the field, but I think the brain is like your radio and the mind is the signals that come through it. It's just a receiver and holder and kind of sorter through that files things away for retrieval later, and holder of experience.
So it brings up three different things. And I was trying to remember what they were.
Right.
First, just a point that's kind of a tangent to what you were saying is that, so you're talking about suffering and illusion. I think it's the illusion that creates the suffering.
Yeah.
Not the other way around. So I think what the SatoriWest method offers is that because it's so concrete, because it's based in neurophysiology and neuropsychology, that it just makes it easier. Like it makes it more dense information wise, that is for sure, but it makes it crystal clear because a lot of spiritual literature, even modern, modern masters who I very much respect, as well as the ancient ones, they use language that was, that had a lot of paradox, like, Dogen and Zen talked about, that, to understand enlightenment, you have to, to understand Buddhism, you have to study the mind. You have to study the self. To study the self, you have to forget the self. It's like, well, what? Where's the self? What self? And, or they talk about monkey mind and big mind and small mind and this mind and that mind. It's just like, what are you talking about? So in the very astute perception that you had, I think it helps to understand that the mind, that you should define mind in one specific way, which is why I don't tend to use the word mindfulness, because the mind to me is kind of like more of a left hemisphere, kind of egocentric separation, using language to understand everything and carve it and acquire things. It's really the part of our survival wiring that gets used like the most. And then, so if you understand the mind as the ego and thoughts and, and labeling of experience, and then you say, well, then there's the brain, which is the hardware that knows it's alive. It's the hardware that can hold. The mind and the thoughts cannot hold two paradigms in consciousness at the same time. It just can't. Only the brain can do that.
Right.
Only when you access more of the entirety of your brain. So I think that distinction makes it easier for me to understand, and it's helped me in my so-called journey.
And then my next question to that is, just to add on to it, is, is consciousness in the brain or is consciousness outside of the brain?
there are a lot of people who have spiritual beliefs and ideas, and maybe they're extremely valid. Um, I, there's nothing about the SatoriWest method that is metaphysical. It's just a pretty bright line.
Nice.
So consciousness is a brain function. And people will say you can have out-of-body experiences, but those also can be explained as extracampine hallucinations. Who knows? But
Mhm.
the brain has has very sophisticated, very cool illusions. Even the illusion of seeing, which is really more of an illusion than anything, actually.
Right.
So a physical vision. So yeah, that's my answer is that if someone were to show me some data or evidence that there is consciousness that exists outside the brain, I would be thrilled to see it.
Yeah. I've been thinking about this for, I don't know, 15 years, I guess, because I read an article from a researcher, and for the life of me, I can't remember where I read it, and a German researcher, and he said they had done studies um, with a man who was in a car accident, and he had, part of his brain lobotomized, whichever part, I'm not sure. I'm just not recalling. But, and he couldn't remember, who he was, what he did, all those functions were his whole past life was, I mean, you know, previous to that day was erased, gone. But under hypnosis, he could pull all of it up. So it led the researchers to say that, and they use some kind of device to read, and I'm being very cagey about it, but not on purpose. I haven't been able to refine the art. Maybe I dreamt it. But they said that they found that the memories, or they believe that the memories and therefore consciousness, are held outside the body in a proton field that is pulled, your memories and all are pulled back into your brain. Your brain pulls the things in that it wants to remember. So therefore, under hypnosis, he could pull all of his life memories back, but without it, he couldn't, because that part of the brain was shut off from the accident. And I thought that was so interesting, and I lost the article. Yeah. But I
So
guess if they replicated it, we would be reading about it since then. So I'm just saying it as a point for conversation.
yeah,
But
no, it's a great point. As
yeah,
usual, it brings up a couple of things.
right.
One is that, and I'll try to remember both. One is that one thing that's remarkable about the brain, uh, not just the human brain, but particularly the human brain, is that, because maybe we have two of them, and maybe some other things, there is like an intensive amount of redundancy built into the brain,
Mm.
so that you could literally remove a chunk and you could form, because of that neuroplasticity,
Neuroplasticity. Yeah.
either possible to form dendritic connections that can compensate for it, or other parts of the brain can compensate for it. So, that's a whole body of science
Sure.
so the fact that someone with brain damage can ultimately remember things is because it's not encoded.
Mm.
Memory is encoded in necessarily in just one area.
Mm.
It is probably encoded both in the left and right side. It may also be encoded in like upper and lower aspects like cortex, subcortical.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to add about consciousness, uh, I think is probably worth saying that I said, there's nothing metaphysical about SatoriWest Method, and that consciousness, if the brain dies,
Right.
consciousness goes with it. Personal consciousness, but I think that the brain is a transducer
Mm-hmm.
of a of of consciousness, as it may be a force of physics or something. I don't know, where it
Mm-hmm.
can it can realize that kind of iterative knowing that that it can transduce something, so that even though, and this is really getting into the weeds of the spiritual side of the SatoriWest method, even though you may wake up to the illusion of the mind and to the illusion that the brain has, that you actually see anything directly, or that, that you have your senses, your body, your mind, your actions are actually happening, that there's even time
Right.
itself is an illusion that the brain can see past. And that, if so, all you experience is your brain. That is the universe subjectively for you. However, there's no real analogy except to say wormhole, but there's a door into a higher reality that like consciousness or existence exists in the universe. It's just that the
Right.
brain evolved to the point that it could transduce it. It can experience it. And
So
so that's what gives people this universal sense of connection.
right.
Once they find that inner emptiness that's alive and knows that it knows that it knows, there's a sense of, oh, the universe is this. And it must be this because it's like, well, how do you know you're alive? Because I know.
Right.
Any
That's that awakening that you're talking about,
right.
awakening and a knowing. And you wrote that your brain becomes the organ of spirituality at its highest stages of development. No, and so I mean, I think that's what you're saying, is that there's that window there, that gateway, uh, that wormhole through the brain, through its activity, through its understanding.
Well, that is true. And what I meant by that in a different way was that, when you brain shift and you soak your brain in wellness and you learn these skills of, letting go, blah, 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 even if it happens in an instant, like from a crisis, or you're developing, cultivating these things over years or decades. When I say this stage of development, it's like if we lived long enough, our brains would normally, I believe, become awakened. It's just that Siddhartha himself and other people, many, many, many other people, have discovered a shortcut to so that your brain can evolve to its highest potential faster than living 200 or 300 years.
Right.
And I believe that's what the SatoriWest method does, is it shortens it even more.
Right. Well, it's stripping out all of that language that is difficult to decipher at times,
Right.
because it's translated from Indian to Chinese to Japanese back in, and then into English. And what does that mean? And who translated the character? And
Yeah.
and all of those things. You had mentioned in an earlier conversation we had that you don't need to meditate. You don't know that you don't need to quiet the mind and to become awakened, right, or enlightened. That your life can be crazy and your mind can be racing, um, and what Buddha and I think a lot of the other enlightened masters or ascended masters are saying is that really it's the quieting of the mind allows us to see our true nature, and there's very few in historically in the books that say that's possible instantly, like an instant enlightenment versus a long-term and longer practice enlightenment. Why are people sitting in monasteries uh, meditating for 30 years when it can be so fast? Is it's and I think one of your propositions is that and please correct me, is that when you're under, the more stress you're under, the closer you can be to having this transformation, pretty much. you know um the more stress the better, right? I think you wrote there's an ancient expression that says those who suffer the most have the best chances of achieving deep fulfillment or reaching the highest realms of the spiritual.
Again, these questions are so great. They bring up a lot of different points. So do you need to do meditation or zazen or anything in order to be enlightened? Definitely not. um, there's tons of people who awaken to this, this greater reality. A lot of them happen because they suffer some crisis or whatever. But uh, different religions, prayer or whatever can do that. I think brain shifting kind of just speaks to the core, what is actually, physically happening, if you can put under a microscope. I do want to make the point. I think it's very important, this point, and I make it over and over wherever I go, it seems, especially like in Zen centers, that, I was part of a Buddhist discussion that you try to go places where you can find tranquility, like a peaceful lake and all, and that kind of gives you the sense of perspective, which is great. And it's a form of wellness. Like, I think physical wellness has to do with, a big part of it is not just, taking supplements, exercising, and diet. It also is being in physical nature, because the diversity of stimuli that allows the brain. But the silence and the stillness, the activity, the emptiness of activity and of stillness and silence is internal. It's not external.
Right.
So, um, so the mind is busy and the ego is going to want, and, and the ego gives you your personality, and it's never going to be perfect, and it's always going to be a little broken, and always, but the stillness and the emptiness that can hold it, is always present and always there. Can I just give you, is there time for just a quick story?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So
Please.
this kind of illustrate the point. I don't know, I love telling the story. So when my son was, I think it was like 8, and I took him to a birthday party here at the Pacific Science Center in Seattle, and they have party rooms, and the party rooms they're very insulated. It's like thick doors, they have like rugs on the outside, and you open up. And I left him at the party. I stayed for a little bit, then I left, and I came back, and it was just, the hallway was quiet. And then I was like, probably in some level of serenity. And I opened the door, and this like blast of noise and chaos came out. And I like literally like shrunk back, as if someone like put a bright light in your head and you're coming out of a dark movie theater. And then I saw a parent that I know sitting across the other room, the other side of the room, who was just enjoying it and appreciating that there's, and I just kind of just transformed a little bit in that moment and opened up awareness to the entirety of the moment, including whatever annoyance I may have had, my sense of self, but particularly the noise and the chaos, the spitballs running,
Right.
and I experienced an inner quietness in midst of that noise and chaos. And Zen definitely acknowledges that, that it's almost like some Zen masters have said this in a very derogatory way, to just not practice black cushion Zen, which means that you sit on a cushion, and then, and then you get up and you go about your life, and it's a different, that's different than sitting on the black cushion. Is that life is enlightenment in itself, and it, you don't need to do anything to find that inner stillness, except to just realize it, just to look. And then you realize, oh my God, it's just there. It's just hanging out.
It's always there. We just don't know it's there after
Right.
1 years old or 2 years old or something, and all this conditioning comes in. That made me think of, I just wrote down two notes. One was eye of the storm, like the calmness in the eye of the storm. That parent that you're saying in that party room is just sitting there, just not affected by everything, but loving it. Like, look at all the joy, look at all the kids. My son or daughter's having so much fun. I'm glad I can
Yeah.
be here and observe it. And this is life, and just loving it. And then I was thinking about like athletes who get into what they call the zone or their flow state. You have a stadium full of people cheering. You got the other team doing whatever. You're under a clock. You got to make a thing. If you lose everything, you lose the game, whatever. And they're able to find that kind of focus. I think that's like a very practical life way of kind of seeing it, like in sports, or musician in a crowd, or you know parent at the party, kind of examples of that.
Yeah, there, the activity of sports and the parent in that room, it exemplifies two aspects of brain shifting. One is that when you realize aliveness and so your brain, your awareness opens up, what's happening is that you're literally soaking in, you're bathing in the energy of the moment rather than just carving it up into information pieces. And that, so
Mm,
it becomes like a warm bath, even in difficult times, because you're kind of bathing in the energy of the moment. And the other aspect of brain shifting is
mm,
the realization that there's no conscious effort. And so that when that awareness of awareness is really allowed to intensify, it's actually more in control. And so it's like, so you can't do sports, you can't do jazz by thinking it through. You have to allow it. You have to be so alert and aware that you can allow that to flow through you. And so I don't know that it's as much how, using the word focus as it's a kind of you're alert, but you're not focused on your fingers. You're not, playing guitar or a jet instrument or whatever, or you're not focused on your hands on the bat or tennis, whatever it is, or whatever you're doing. You're opening up to the moment in a way that allows all of your brain to integrate information and to then act on it in a way that's most creative, and is probably the best way that your brain can muster at that moment, rather than the limited way of trying to use tunnel vision to sort of think through every second and being kind of stilted.
being in a state of allowing all of the content and to come in, all of the stimulation to come in, and not diverting off to identifying or judging pieces of it. And rather than the shower pelting on you, you're in a pool, right? Just like let it all be here at once. It's okay. All this is extremely interesting, and it brings me to wonder about your earlier life that brought you to a place of wanting to study, become a psychologist and a psychiatrist, excuse me, and also get involved in Zen, Japanese Zen meditation.
When I was 15 years old, I was sitting in an outside classroom in a portable, in Miami Beach, and reading this psychology textbook that I had for a class, when the author posed a question that to me was sort of mind-blowing. And what the author said is that the brain is essentially just ultimately a collection of very organized chemicals, if you break it right down to it. But that organized collection of chemicals can wake up and know it's alive. And I found that kind of mind-blowing, and it's actually relevant even to brain shifting. And so I had this desire, very intense desire, to study consciousness and the brain. And then the same year, my parents took us to this hospital ship that was docked in Miami, and I had this burning desire to be a physician and, go around the world with a team and delivering, medicine. And so I wrestled with that and decided ultimately that I could be a psychiatrist and do both, which I think I was mentioning was in some ways neither. So I went in that direction, but I managed to find a residency program, a psychiatry training program that also offered a PhD in neuropsychology, which is the study of the brain and behavior and consciousness and that kind of thing. So I did that, and I finished the coursework for 3 years, although I didn't stay for the dissertation. But that started me kind of putting things together. And then in 1980, my parents were killed. They were murdered. And, a friend of mine suggested that I try Zen. And so I kind of took to it like a duck to water, and gradually, or in spurts, I began to realize that meditation was really a series of brain exercises that change the brain's perspective. And so that's how the two, Buddhism and my interest in consciousness, and then also clinical interest in psychiatry and how to treat people and how to, how to explain cognitive therapy and how to explain all these other things, even Freudian things, in a broader Buddhist context. It all kind of came together and then eventually was called the SatoriWest Method.
Wow. Trauma and loss also spurred you in another direction. I mean, just like you're saying in your method, it's just horrible. I'm sorry for that. My interest as a kid was always, I grew up 3 months premature. I was an incubator for the first 3 months. I have chronic musculoskeletal pain, migraine headaches, and daily
Oh my
until I was
gosh.
32. So that sent me in a direction of studying Chinese medicine, alternative medicine, traveling around to many, many countries, researching traditional healing methods and so on and so on. But I was also interested in altered states of consciousness because, and that's why kind of one of the ways I got into meditation also was because I wanted to change the state of my consciousness to change so I wasn't trapped by the pain feelings all the time. So the chronic pain I would feel in my spine, my neck, my head, inside of my face and my eye was not going to conquer me. I still wanted to live life. Does the SatoriWest method? I know there's so many methods and techniques and involved in the 5 elements of it that you spoke about and shared with us. But are there methods that help you change your levels of consciousness or your states of consciousness? And I don't mean it has to be in a spiritual way. I mean,
I think it's important to define terms,
yes.
right? So, like you can take a drug and your consciousness can be altered and you can have this, whatever, psychedelic, even whatever. But I think ultimately what psychedelic means is accessing a more the entirety of the awareness of your brain. So seeing things in a new light, in a new reality that you didn't know before because you were so busy running around. So, and I don't, when we talk about spirituality, it's a word that I am careful about using because, this is just about, as far as I'm concerned, just about the brain using all of its assets. And if part of doing that, one has realizations and understandings that one calls spiritual, that's fantastic. The sense of connectedness, of wholeness, of non-duality, which is
Yes.
like,
The big
you know,
terms today.
it's just that it's that, I'm sure we talked about this, but that sense of knowing that what am I? That process that's aware of a process can contain even the sense of self and the external world. And that gives you the sense of holistic or non-duality. And so is that spiritual or is it just a brain phenomenon? I mean, I use the word spiritual because it speaks to so many people.
Right.
Sometimes I use the word psycho-spiritual.
Mhm.
So just to try to bridge the
Spruce it
gap.
up.
So, I mean,
Spruce it up.
if that's your question is how do you, are you altering your state of consciousness in order to, deal with or escape from or, manage pain? It's not quite that. It's, it's opening up awareness, the capacity of your brain that is right there,
Mhm.
right now. To experience pain and suffering and negativity with perspective so that it's not because it's the information that I think causes most of the suffering of pain.
Yeah.
So that so like one of a major, treatment for chronic pain is mindfulness.
Right.
And even though I don't use the term mindfulness, but it's a perfectly great term for many people, just that awareness, that opening up awareness, seeing things as more than just the information value that you must push away. You experience it in its entirety. It allows the energy of the moment of the experience to come in, and energy experience with every other type of energy that's there that would normally be discriminated against because your left hemisphere is, carving it out with information, with language.
Okay. Spirituality for me, it's a description of, it's spiritual, it's a way people can describe their mind, right? Or their experience, and however they want to define spiritual is how they want to define spiritual. But like you're saying, in the Satori method, you don't need that jargon or those descriptors to have a success. We just look at tunnel vision, a word, and perspective, just a word. It's not couched in spiritual language. And you don't have to believe in God, and you can store a greater being or whatever, and you can still achieve a good result. So that's perfect, right? So it works. It could work for everybody, regardless of their spiritual beliefs. Okay. And when I'm talking about altered states of consciousness, I'm talking about ways of, it's exactly what you, in the description you were just giving about mindfulness is a perfect example for me, because the mindfulness is putting on a focus, right? And what I'd like to do, so I see it as you're mindless, your mind is scattered everywhere, there's no focus, and then you become mindful in your mindfulness practice, in the meditation. But then for my belief and my practice is you have to go into a state of no mind, where the mind is not mindful of the breathing, of the counting, of the breaths, of the abdomen any longer. Because the less mindful you can be at that point, the less tunnel vision you have and the more aware you become. It feels like your body is expanding and your mind is expanding, or your consciousness is expanding. So for me, that's state of, and it's an altered state of consciousness, because it's not the normal narrow state that you're talking about, that tunnel vision, was a way for me to pull out of my chronic pain states.
Yeah, as usual, your perceptions brought up a couple of points. By the way, the screen froze for a little bit, so I didn't quite catch,
Oh,
all of said, but I
well,
kind
it's
of
all
caught enough.
rambling.
No, it's very
Yeah.
perceptive. So I think what tunnel vision is, it's attention that's grabbed to different things, and that attention can be grabbed like this, so that when attention is allowed to go inward and awareness is allowed to open up and encompass the moment, that's when the new reality dawns on you. That's where pain, your relation to pain, and relation to your own psychological pain, suffering, gets seen on gets experienced at a different level. People have asked me, well, you're walking down a mountainside at nighttime. Don't you want to be focused in on your feet? And don't you want to be, isn't that mindfulness? As people in the world of mindfulness describe it, it's actually a state of detached awareness. But what detached needing to be defined. So it's a big part of brain shifting. But when you're walking down the mountain, you don't want to just focus on your feet. You want to be aware of your balance. You want to be aware of the sounds. You want to be aware of the rest of your body. And to be balanced, you can't just focus on one thing. Try to stand on one foot, holding on to the other one, behind you, and you can't just focus on one foot at a time. You need to open up awareness to the entirety of it. And in many ways, that brain shift involves getting in touch, that sense of awareness, aliveness, that kind of thing, is a form of balance. It requires balance, maybe on some level, because the brains have to be balanced in order to have that heightened sense of aliveness, of awareness.
I'm trying to just do my best to help people find ways to transform themselves, right? Through all methods. So we hear about your transformations and your work that transforms other people, and then they're hearing it, and and it's all different things. And I just want to keep doing it myself, and want others to do it. And it seems like the world is suffering, and we need to get past the suffering. And here's a method that is not in the super mainstream, like mindfulness, is everywhere now, but we're still suffering. So let's go deeper.
The world is in tunnel vision, and
Right.
no one seems to be able to call it out as that until I hope when it's named, people
Right.
can You mentioned that that was one of the first points of information to absorb. I mean, I think the very first point of the SatoriWest method, that everyone is suffering, is very perspective generating. But then knowing that you're in tunnel vision, that's sort of nuclear.
Right, right. I've really enjoyed our conversation. And
Thank you so much. I've really enjoyed it as well. Just your perceptive questions felt really just gratifying.